Hi everyone, my name's Leanne. I'll be reading the Bible for you today. We're reading from Matthew chapter 8, verses 18 to 34. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." When he arrived at the other side in the region of Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. "What do you want with us, Son of God?" they shouted. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" Some distance from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus, "If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs." He said to them, "Go." So they came out and went into the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off, went into the town, and reported all this, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. Then the whole town went out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. This is the word of the Lord.
G'day, my name's Simon and I'm on the ministry team here at Camden Haven Anglican, and I'm bringing us our next instalment of our series in Matthew. Last week, Tim walked us through Matthew 8, 1 to 17, as we saw the healing of the leper, the healing of the centurion's son, where Jesus simply said, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, where we see him fulfilling Isaiah 53 as he took up our infirmities, bore our diseases, and brings the outsider in. And today we are continuing our time in Matthew chapter 8 as we explore the cost of following Jesus and the peace that brings from following him. We'll walk through this section of Matthew 8 as we see 2 men who wanted to follow Jesus, the town that begged Jesus to leave, as well as the men who were figuring out how to follow Jesus. I love playing any and every sport growing up, and in primary school I had some mates who had begun doing a sport called nippers. It was a bit strange to me as a kid growing up in the suburbs, about half an hour from the beach, but it sounded pretty good. They were saying, "Yeah, it's so much fun. You get to go surfing and bodyboarding and playing games on the beach." And I was thinking, man, this sounds exactly like a beach holiday that we go on, except it's every single week. I am in. So somehow I managed to convince my parents, even though we lived half an hour away, pretty much an hour away from this beach in Avalon in Sydney, to go along every Sunday morning. So we went along, and I can recall getting there my first morning, or even getting ready, putting my swim cap on and my nippers and my rashi and my Speedos. And anyway, I got into it. I was so excited for this beach holiday. And when we got there, it was about 15 degrees. It was raining sideways, and the swell was pumping. Anyway, I joined in with my under 8s group. And one of the guys from the surf club came in, he said, "Alrighty guys, today we're going to do our S badge course." And everyone's jumping up with excitement. And he said, "All you got to do is run down to the pool about 500 meters away, do 8 laps, just 8 laps, and then run back again 500 meters." And everyone's going, "Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so excited." And I'm thinking, man, when are we going to start building sandcastles? I'm not too excited about this. And so we began, I ran, I made it to the pool, and I could see the waves coming through. It was pretty scary, and I jumped in and did 1 lap and came back, and after a couple of mouthfuls of salt water and getting tossed around by the waves, I thought, this is not going well. I'd had enough. I just started bawling my eyes out and screamed out for mum and dad, and they took me home, and that was that for nippers. I thought I was signing up for a beach holiday every single week. But as soon as it got too difficult, I said, it's just too hard. I've had enough. And the reality is that in order to follow Jesus, we must understand who he is. Because if we don't realize that he didn't come to bring comfort and prosperity in this world, the moment it starts getting too hard, too difficult, we can just throw in the towel and say, well, it's too hard. This isn't what I signed up for. From these accounts written for us by Matthew, he wants us to see that following Jesus is costly, but the cost is worth it when we're following the one who conquers evil and calms the storm. So our first point today is two men who wanted to follow Jesus, looking at this section in verses 18 to 22. Just prior to this, Jesus had healed many. He drove out evil spirits so that the crowds, they gathered him, understandably, and they followed him. He's decided to move on and go to the other side of the lake, verse 18. But then he's greeted with someone. The first of these two men, we'll call him the eager enthusiast, or eager Eddie. So Matthew 8:19 says, Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. He was a teacher of the law, one who taught the scriptures. He was an expert in them. And so expert as he was, he had seen something of which Jesus was doing, and he heard something of which Jesus had been teaching. And there's a surprising humility on his part, isn't there? With an impressive enthusiasm as he manages to push his way to the front of the crowd and get Jesus' attention before he hops into the boat and says, I'll follow you wherever you go. Surely this is someone who got it right. Wouldn't you hope that if you could have been there, seen him, heard him, that you'd respond something like this man? But listen to what Jesus says. He replies in verse 20, Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. It's not quite a rebuke, but it's pretty harsh, at least a word of warning. After hearing his teaching, seeing miracles, you might find yourself saying, I will follow this man wherever he leads. But Jesus may have said in response, look, foxes and birds have homes in this world, but not so with the Son of Man. You've got to understand what it means to follow me. Follow him, and it will not be the path to greatness in this world. Follow him, and it will not be the path to comfort in this world. Follow him, and it will not be the path to prosperity in this world. The teacher of the law, this eager enthusiast, was no better off than all of us. He made his decision about following Jesus, but I suspect that we can see things even more clearly than he could, right? It should be clear to us that Jesus didn't come to make life easy for us in this world. Right after I graduated Year 12, my youth group that I grew up with down in Sydney, they organised a mission kind of schoolies trip for us, and we went to Vanuatu. It was amazing. There were 40 of us, and we spent 10 days there, 5 days in a Bible college, helping rebuild bathrooms and classrooms, and the last 5 days just chilling out on the beach. There were 40 of us in total, youth leaders, youth pastor, and this was 10 years ago. And looking back at that photo of 40 of us, I can count less than half who are still following Jesus just 10 years ago. If you think that following Jesus is easy, something you can take on, be at home in this world, you've got to think again. The time will come when it will be costly for you to be a Christian. It's no good being the eager enthusiast saying, I'll follow you, Jesus, wherever it leads. The time will come when it's not going to be comfortable for you to be a Christian. Jesus didn't come to give you comfort in this world or make life easy for you in this world. If you want to be a fox and make a home in this world, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So that's the eager enthusiast. And now let's look at the reasonable disciple, half-hearted Harry, whatever you want to call him. But he is so reasonable, isn't he? Verse 21, another disciple said to him, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. Some presume that his dad may have just passed away, but if that were the case, he would be in mourning for weeks and he wouldn't be out on the road and confronting Jesus and asking him this question. But his question seems so reasonable. Isn't that what you'd hope you'd say if you found yourself in this situation? As soon as I've got that sorted out, I want to follow him. But verse 22, Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." This time, there's a note of rebuke in Jesus' words. It's not an easy rebuke to take either. Do you think that it'd be easier if you had been there in that moment? Jesus says, when I call you to follow me, there is nothing that takes importance over him. There are other important obligations, but not one of them comes before our obligation to Jesus. I do want to follow Jesus, but would you mind if I just put it off for now before I'm really serious about it for an indefinite period of time? I'll follow you, Jesus, but do you mind if I put off following you during school or work or uni because it just makes me stand out a bit? It's a bit inconvenient and gets in the way of my fun. I'll follow you, Jesus, but you come second to my career. I'll follow you, Jesus, but I just want to get married first. And I don't want the whole, they've got to be Christian thing to get in the way of me finding a spouse. I'll follow you, Jesus, but just as long as you understand that you're just one of a list of priorities in my life. Discipleship is a life of unqualified commitment to our King Jesus. He leads, we follow. If we want the kingdom of God to grow, there is a cost. The kingdom of self has to shrink. He may be demanding more than we remembered. Jesus says that if you follow me, I'm asking for all of you. He's asking for commitment. If you're an eager enthusiast, take stock of what following Jesus means. If you're a reasonable disciple, keeping Christianity in what you think might be the right place, don't want to let it get too out of proportion, following Jesus cannot take second place to anything. Our second point, the town that begged Jesus to leave. We're skipping a scene, we'll come back to that one, but let's look at 28 to 34. Jesus and his disciples make it to the other side of the lake, to the Gerasenes, and this part of the region was a place where you didn't want to go. There were two men there who were so possessed that no one walked through this place. When Jesus got there, these two men came down to meet him, and the evil spirits that possessed them started shouting. Verse 29, "What do you want with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" It gets weirder as they beg Jesus to, in verse 31, "Send us into the herd of pigs." And so Jesus says, "Go." And so they came out, they went to the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Verse 33, those tending the pigs ran off and reported all that had happened. In that moment, they've just seen their whole livelihood go running into the water. That's all their money gone just like that. Everyone was terrified of him. The dark forces of evil are terrifying. But here you see someone who stepped ashore that day, who had complete power over the dark forces of evil. How would you expect the people in that town to react? Of course, they pleaded him to leave. Are you sure that if you had have been there, seeing that kind of power, that you would have wanted him to stay? Would you have got it right any more than they did that day? Here he demonstrates his power over evil. On the cross, he disarms evil, and one day he will ultimately destroy evil. That's the town that begged Jesus to leave. And lastly, the men who are learning how to follow Jesus, verses 23 to 27. Did you notice that right after Jesus talks about the cost of following him, where he leads his disciples? Right into a storm. Verse 23, then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. They moved out to the Lake of Galilee. Try to imagine what it would have been like to be there. As the boat moved into the middle of the lake and you're at the point where it's just too late to turn back, the waves grew bigger, the wind was howling, there's water crashing into the boat. It was really terrifying, and those in the boat were losing their minds. Ever been in a situation like that? Boat in a storm, a small boat. I don't know if there's anything that could be more terrifying than a storm at sea. There was a huge storm last Friday night at 3 a.m, and I was in my home and there was a roof over my head and I was terrified. But at sea, maybe a bushfire, it is terrifying. Absolutely nothing you can do when you're up against the power of the wind and the waves. All you can do is cling on, and that's what they did. The gale howled, the waves roared, but Jesus sound asleep. The disciples shook him, woke him up. Verse 25, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. You have little faith, why are you so afraid? He got up, rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. Rebukes only work if you have power over someone. When I was in high school, before I could drive, I caught the train into school and back home most days. And I caught the train with a few mates, and as teenage boys do, we played a fighting game called Six Fish. So if someone farts and they don't say safe, someone can call out Six Fish, and everyone gets to punch you until you can name off six fish. And so one morning, Monday morning peak hour, sitting on the train, about 8 of us together, and my mate Sean farts, and so Sam yells out, Six Fish, and so 7 boys just punching one boy in the arm, the leg, and he's calling out, oh, brim, cod, barramundi. And as we're in the midst of this, we hear this loud, deep, commanding voice penetrate through the whole carriage, and he says, boys, stop that right now. And we stop, and we turn around and we see the head of the maths department pointing at us and yelling at us. And so we stop what we're doing, we sit down, just go, oh, sorry, sir. And it was just silence for the rest of that trip into school. So much power and authority. Good moment for Mr. Bradshaw, head of the maths department. But rebuking only works if you have authority over someone. Verse 26, he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. Jesus is the one who has power over all creation. There is one who rules over everything. Calming the wind and the waves on this little lake in Galilee was peanuts to him. He controls all the winds, all the waves, all over the earth. It was a great storm that became a great calm. So what does this mean for us? Bringing it home. Everyone, a lot of people were just terrified of him, weren't they? But if you met someone who you knew had power over the evil forces, power over the wind and the waves, power over your life, and you didn't know him, what would you do? I'd start to panic. It'd be pretty terrifying, wouldn't it? But if you knew him and you loved him and you knew that he loved you, wouldn't that bring such peace? You can follow him and you can endure the storms without fear. The storms of unemployment, illness, anxiety, death. Faith in Christ eliminates fear of your circumstances. I ended up going back to Nippers and having another go at the S-Badge course because my coach called me up and said, have another go, see how you find it. It might not be as scary as you first thought. And went back down. It was another really windy day. The swell was pumping and there were waves crashing into the pool. And I ended up giving it a go and completing it, only because my coach was right beside me the entire time. You can follow Jesus and you can endure the storms of life without fear, knowing he is with you and he has power over the storm. So I follow him even though it's going to be costly. He conquers evil and he calms the storm. Paul writes these words in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty might become rich. Let's keep looking to the cross as we understand the cost that Jesus took for you, and we remind ourselves that the cost of following Christ is absolutely worth it.